going live. One, two, I think we are on. Yes, all right, we are live. All right, so welcome everybody again to Tuesday's social distance learning. This week, of course, we are not doing the bench doctor. He will be returning next week with some exciting shotgun shenanigans. But this week we have part two of our disability panel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Danielle, who's going to moderate that this evening. And she'll introduce the panelists. This is, I believe, live streaming on both the private YouTube link, which I'll drop in the channels now, as well as, if I've done everything right, live on Facebook. And yes, I can see Mark's lovely face on Facebook. So on the Facebook members only lounge. So if you have questions, drop them in the chat, drop them in the Zoom chat, drop them in the Discord chat. Drop them in the Facebook chat and we will try to get them. Danielle's got a list that she's going to be working from. So it's a system, as we've been told. So if you've got questions, we'll get them to Danielle and we'll get them in the queue. Danielle, I'm going to turn it over to you. Introduce our speakers. Tell us what we're going to be hearing about tonight.
Me? This isn't my panel. How about we have our speakers introduce themselves? Mark, since you're on the screen, why don't you start with us?
Hey everybody, welcome back to part two of this talk. We kind of went into depth last time, but we'll do a brief introduction this time of who we are. My name is Mark Okniansky. I'm an attorney in California. I'll just give the disclaimer right now. We're going to be talking about some things that might touch on some laws or might come across as legal advice, but we don't intend any of what we talk about to be legal advice. And any questions or answers or questions that we do answer, again, they're for entertainment purposes and not for legal advice. So I'll start with that. I did most of the talking last time for the physical disability panel, and so most of the talking today will be done by the other panelists. So I will pass it on to Deborah.
So I'm Deb Yamanaka. I'm the CEO of a technology and emergency management, but primarily technology services company in Virginia. And I will be talking about life with a service dog. I was diagnosed with PTSD about 6.5 years ago formally. I was diagnosed informally about 6 months prior to that. And I'm going to talk about gun ownership when you have been diagnosed with PTSD and are navigating public life with a service dog at your side. And who is talking next?
We'll go to Karen.
Okay.
Hey everyone, my name is Karen. I am not a lawyer. I am not your lawyer. I always wanted to say that. I'm really happy to be on this panel. I've worked with depression and a couple other neurological and psychiatric disabilities for a good 25 years now. Like that, I also use a service dog in public, but there are some issues with using him around training that I think we'll get into. And then in my day job, I am a professor of disability studies. And so I encounter in the classroom a lot of students with disabilities as well as working with the community. So really excited to be part of the session.
And then our last panelist, if he still wants to be part of the panel, is Nate. You want to jump on and turn on your camera, Nate? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Lonnie is also joining. Lonnie wasn't part of our first panel, but he has a wealth of knowledge. And so we're asking him to join us on this panel. So Lonnie, why don't you introduce yourself?
So I'm Lonnie Weissman, and I don't know how much of a wealth of information I have here, but I have a service dog. I'm a combat infantry medic, former, served in Vietnam for 1.5 years, and have worked both as an engineer and as a math high school teacher. And I have a service dog, and I've had this particular service dog for the last 5 years.
Very good. Thanks, Lonnie. I look forward to hearing from you. And now we will go to Nate.
Hey, y'all. Nate Tilton here. I've done 4 combat tours, 2 to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan, and I'm also a retired air marshal. And I also deal with PTSD and a number of other disabilities. So I'll be here hanging out, fielding some questions. Thanks.
So now we will pass it back to Danielle for the questions.
A number of you, I know 3 of you, 4 of you, have or will be getting soon service animal. So can you tell us a little bit about how they help you, and then when you can't use them? How about we start with Karen?
Hey, thanks. Yeah. So at my feet is my beagle Momo. I've had him for 15 years since he was a baby. He wasn't initially, he was just supposed to be a pet, but he gradually morphed into being my service dog. The more I realized how useful it would be. He helps me a lot in terms of grounding. In periods of high stress, I can dissociate. And so he helps keep me in the current multiverse, as we would, as kids might say. And then he also helps me essentially when I'm going through panic and anxiety attacks, and also just generally just try to calm me down, also get me out of situations which are a bit too tense for me to handle. Since, you know, I've my firearm experiences, you know, when I was 8, I was in Australia. So, you know, I shot some rifles back then a long time ago. And then didn't have anything to do with them until in my 20s. I took an NRA course and thought that was fun, but really didn't get into it because I wasn't a green card holder or American citizen. And just thought it was fun, but just something to do when you go to Las Vegas. And I only became a owner this year because of the current larger political situation, but then also realized as I started doing it, it's been really good for my mental health to have me some big focus, especially in just like being able to just like get into the zen of the moment and shoot. But I can't bring him yet because there's still a certain level of anxiety that I have around it. I'm not sure how. He's not very noise reactive, but he might be noise reactive, and that would set me off in a bad, set us, the 2 of us, off in a bad way. So I want to make sure that I'm at a place where it's entirely normal for me to be around the loud sounds and not reacting, and then he'll know that it's okay. But that's the challenge I'm finding now is, you know, I'm going up to an apple seed in Sacramento in a couple weeks, and I can't take him, and it's a long drive. So I'm stressing out about that, trying to figure out, I can't take him because I'm, but what do I do then? I think it's a challenge that many of us have. Deb, or I should hand it back to Danielle, and she can decide who's next.
Oh, I was actually going to go to Deb. I was hoping she would introduce us to Honor.
So Honor is actually on the bed beside behind me, and he is a white German Shepherd Siberian Husky mix, which is why all of my furniture is white. And so they're classic shedders. So I am not a combat veteran, although I did serve our country in a different capacity earlier in my life. I am 1 in 4 women who has been the victim of aggravated sexual violence. And my instinct is to fight, which saved my life. And what I did not understand until I was diagnosed with it is that PTSD does not just affect combat veterans. It also, and they think more women in the United States are affected by PTSD than even those who have seen combat. And early on, combat induced PTSD was treated by trying to help veterans understand they were off the battlefield. But when you are a woman whose assault experiences include the parking lot of a grocery store, you can't be taught that they are safe. And so what I encountered was not the depression associated with the PTSD. I've been very, very fortunate in that regard, but it's hypervigilance. And what that means in short is that I believe that when certain patterns emerge that I am at risk, I become hypervigilant and I prepare to fight. But because I'm an adult, I understand that it's wrong to hit people just because they startled you. And so I don't hit them. And so that constant, you know, balance between not swinging if you're startled, so being very alert to your surroundings so that you are not startled, plays a tremendous toll on your mental health. And what you do is you begin to withdraw. And I'm not a person who made a lot of sense as a person to withdraw. I run a company. I didn't at the time I was diagnosed, but it wasn't much longer when I became the CEO of this company. And a lot of the things that I loved doing before, I stopped doing because they had patterns associated with it. Honor's responsibility is to prevent me from being startled. He makes it so that I can rely on him to tell me if someone is coming up behind me. Again, my instinct, if I am startled, if someone comes up behind me, is to throw a punch, and I will knock them out. And that is not good. So he communicates to me via his leash that someone is behind me or coming up around me. And he appears to be very, very friendly. He's socialized to interact with the person so that I can acknowledge the individual, assess the individual, and then determine whether or not that threat is there, as you would with any kind of normal interaction. And he's very, very good at it. So that is, he, in a sense, he is trained to create a boundary and to watch so that the hypervigilance is prevented.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Lonnie, do you want to tell us about Farley?
Sure. So Farley has been with me now for 5 years. He's my third service dog. My first one and second one got to the point where I had to make the decision to put them down. Mainly similar to what Deborah talked about is Farley works with me about hypervigilance. And so when we are, I have a really hard time when I'm in crowded situations. I can't keep my head on a swivel enough. And it really interferes with my interaction with people because it seems like I'm not paying attention to them when I am constantly looking at or observing everything around me and trying to figure out where I can place myself in such a way that I can cover the entire space. So I'm one of those people who, when we go to a restaurant, I sit with a wall to my back so I can see the whole room. Farley sometimes goes with me when we go out to dinner or when we go places where it's new and I don't know much about the environment. I don't always take him with me. I don't like to abuse the privilege of having a service dog. And at the same time, it's nice to have him around. One of the things that I found is anytime I'm in a large gathering of other veterans who also have experienced military service and combat, he is really, really perceptive about their feelings. And so his thing is he works really hard to calm people around him and make sure that they are doing well. So it's actually hard on him, and I try not to bring him to those kinds of gatherings because he's not quite sure who to take care of first, which makes it really hard on him. I have not taken him to the range. He's not noise sensitive, but I don't particularly feel a need to have him with me in those instances. Mainly, I think several of us do, we find shooting a very Zen kind of an experience where our focus is very specific and our situational awareness is really about the target and what we're doing. Farley's been with me since actually he was 8 weeks old. We started working on his training probably right around the time he was 6 or 8 months old. Just getting him out and about, getting him used to being in situations, he's a very social dog. So he's very people oriented, which is really nice because when people come up, much like Deb, when people come up behind me, he will often move in that direction. So I know somebody's coming. And he really kind of settled down after his first year. We worked a lot on his training and getting him in the position where he could focus on what I was feeling emotionally at the same time being aware of his surroundings. So that's pretty much what he does. And he's a Labradoodle. He's the first Labradoodle I had. I've had both a Rottweiler and a German Shepherd as service dogs, and wouldn't go back to the Rott. Love the Shepherd, but I find the non-shedding part, Deb, I find the non-shedding part of a Labradoodle is really, really nice. And so my wife doesn't have to worry about hair all over the place. That's kind of nice.
Thank you. And Nate, I understand you're going to be getting a service dog later this year. Did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, so I will be getting a service dog later this year or very early beginning next year. I'm looking forward to it. And, you know, like some of the other panelists have been talking about, I definitely feel them on that. Like, for instance, when I'm in class or I'm at work, you know, my hypervigilance may kick in, it leads into some anxiety. And, you know, then it looks like may not be paying attention to somebody, or I start what they call like self-grounding, or you know, I try to ground myself in the situation so that way I don't start having an anxiety attack or whatever have you. Yeah, hypervigilance can definitely do that. That's one reason I'm looking forward to having a service dog, because I watched a service dog for a summer, and that was really nice. I found that the service dog was really awesome, and he helped ground me and just really put me at ease. And so that's when I just kind of decided at that point, I was like, I need to get a service dog, because I felt that it really helped return some sort of that normalcy to me, or at least help stem some of the anxiety attacks.
Awesome, thanks. I want to talk about PTSD in a second, but I wanted to start with something a little more general. Someone asked, how should we interpret the questions for the ATF 4473 form when we buy a gun and it asks about mental disabilities? Anybody want to start?
So, you know, I am not a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer, etc. So what helped me was I also got the FFL 03, and there they went into a lot more detail about those questions. And it was pretty clear that what they mean is that, have you ever lost your majority rights? Have you ever been sort of incarcerated or put into a hospital or a psychiatric institution against your will? Have you ever, had somebody take what's called governorship over you? That my interpretation, I think everyone has to come up with their own interpretation because God knows what the ATF, I think they operate in yet another multiverse. But at least for that question, I interpreted it as really like in California, where you ever 5150, like forcibly institutionalized. Because previously, I know I had so much anxiety over that question, because it was like, what do they mean a mental defective? It's just like, and I just find the wording of it so insulting. So I know a lot of my resistance for a long time was that. It was just like, I don't know, it seems so slippery. But since doing the FFL and realizing that the expanded version of that was pretty discreet and it had to involve like a judicial system or forced something, that sort of notched things down for me.
Anybody else want to chime in on that?
So I don't consider PTSD a mental disability, although we're phrasing it as a mental disability for the purposes of this conversation, because there's a service, there's a relationship. PTSD stems from pattern recognition, which is the thing that kept the human species alive for the tens and thousands and how many years we've been on this earth. And so for those of us who have PTSD, what we have is an aspect of our brain that's functioning as it was designed to function, which is recognize a pattern, survive that pattern of badness, make sure that you file that tool away so that the next time that pattern occurs, you survive it again or you avoid it again. So I'm not at risk of taking my life. I'm not at risk of shooting up a school. That is not this piece. This is, the dog lives with me and walks with me, and I live every day navigating a society that has a lot of patterns that repeat themselves for reasons that have nothing to do with me. Women get assaulted, men get assaulted. Until we can figure out how to stop assault, we're going to have people who survive it. And so I look at that and I don't consider this a mental disability. I consider it a mental ability that's functioning as it's supposed to be functioning.
I like your interpretation a lot.
And if I could add to, there's just the discussion about this. I'm going to share my screen real quick here. And you can see that this is not a new question. The ATF has released guidance on this over the years. This one's from 2009, but I've seen the same information in 2011 and 2014. But what everyone has been saying here is correct. It's somebody who has been adjudicated to be mentally defective. So if you've been going to a doctor or something, they prescribe something, you're fine. My understanding of it is that a court or tribunal or some sort of authoritative body hasn't said, hey, you're a danger to yourself or others, or that you lack the mental capacity to contract or manage your own affairs, or if you've ever been in a criminal case where you've pled guilty or not guilty by reason of insanity, you've just waived your rights to firearms, because that's one of the factors there. And of course, if you're found incompetent to stand trial, you're also incompetent to own a firearm according to the law. As you see down in the second half here, there are exceptions to that. We're not going to go through all the exceptions here, but it really is, if you haven't become a danger to yourself or others, to the point where someone has had to intervene and involuntarily commit you, or has had to get a judgment against you saying that you are a danger, then you don't have to mark that box on the ATF 4473.
Thank you. I'm glad we had a lawyer chime in on that.
That was no legal advice.
It's not legal advice, but you tend to read forms better than the rest of us.
Yeah. So I tend to agree with Deb's kind of view of this. I actually have often in my conversations with other veterans and with people with presentations to non-veteran groups about PTSD is reminding them that what PTSD is a natural reaction to a situation. I prefer to think of it as PTSS, a syndrome, as opposed to a disorder. Understanding, of course, in the military, in order to be compensated for PTSD, it required that there be a diagnostic listed. So they gave it as a disorder. But the reality is that it is a completely and totally normal reaction to the situation. Anybody that's gone through any kind of a trauma will have some form of PTSS, and they will become highly vigilant about that particular aspect every time they're in something that's similar. Or, it's kind of like smells, sounds, things like that will trigger that response. And so it's as I always say, it's a very normal thing. I have never thought that that on any application for a firearm that I would list PTSD as a mental disorder in terms of how the law looks at it. I've had a lot of veterans who have asked me, I've worked with veteran organizations, so I've had a lot of veterans who've asked me about whether or not they can legally possess a firearm with a diagnosis of PTSD, and my answer to them is yes, as long as you have not been officially diagnosed as mentally incompetent. And like Mark has said, there are lots of different ways that comes out. But the reality is that as somebody who is affected by PTSS, as I like to call it, I've never felt like it's something that would disqualify me, nor do I have to disclose on a form for the government, other than with the VA, and that's it. And the VA does not share that information with other agencies, so I'm not really worried about it.
So that leads to the next question when we talk about information that we should disclose to the ATF or things like that. Somebody asked, are my medical records discoverable and under what circumstances? I know that a lot of us know about HIPAA, but maybe we're a little concerned that in the aspect of mental health and firearms, maybe some things might be a little less protected. And Mark, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, again, this is touching on kind of a legal question, but in general, is it discoverable? They would have to sue you for something for it to become discoverable. So there would have to be some other reason that they're looking for those records. For instance, if they suspect that you lied on the 4473, you marked no when you should have marked yes as to being adjudicated mentally, incompetent. It's not the right language. I apologize. But you marked that box wrong. So now the ATF is coming after you for doing that. Sure, they're going to ask to see your medical records to see whether you have been diagnosed with as a danger to yourself or to others, or one of the other things we went over. But again, something else would have had to happen for them to even look at that in the first place, I would think.
Yeah. So if Mark, and you make a funny face if I say something wrong, I think what is more likely to happen is like in a self-defense situation, someone storms into my house and I defend myself. Their family may sue me and in the process try to dig up as much dirt on me and find evidence. Oh my God, she's been seeing a psychiatrist and is taking these medications. Clearly this is not someone who should have had a weapon. This is not someone who could properly evaluate whether it was a true self-defense situation, it was an overreaction or so forth. And that's what the other side would do and that's I'm more worried about the other side in a civil lawsuit than I am against the ATF, and which is against also, even despite because I'm in the Bay Area, I don't conceal carry, but I just bought into USCCA. Please use the link in the LGC, blah blah blah. Because I'm worried about those situations where I may get blamed, even though and things used against me that really shouldn't be. Hopefully USCCA would cover that.
And Karen is absolutely right. So that's a different consideration. I think the original question was about criminal liability. And so even if you are not criminally liable for something, you could be civilly liable. There are different standards and there's different rules and different causes of action. So in the case of a self-defense shooting, everything is going to be discoverable. They're going to want to know everything about you. They're going to want to know whether you've been on medication. So things that don't come into court in general, again, this is in general, is, things that aren't relevant to that specific case. So just because you have PTSD, a good lawyer might be able to keep that out of the reach of a jury, unless it somehow plays in. If they get a medical expert to say, well, yeah, what happened here, the circumstances led up to triggering PTSS, and because of that condition, you responded this way where somebody else might not have. All of this, it becomes discoverable. Were you on your medications, right before this incident? All of that. They're going to want to see all of that. So, it is a consideration. I don't think it's something that should bar you from keeping weapons or defending yourself, unless, again, some tribunal, some court, someone has told you can't have guns or that you're a danger. But otherwise, it should be fair game. But you should know, you should go into it knowing that if I do use this weapon for defense or any other reason, all of my history is going to come out in discovery.
When I go to speak to the legislatures around gun rights, my dog is with me, and I am open about that. It doesn't take very much to learn that there's a dog with me at all times. A quick visit to our corporate website will show that. So it's not even a question of it being discoverable with me. It simply is a part of it. I navigate it. He is a limb.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Let's talk a little bit more about PTSD and PTSS. When you guys go to the range, because you don't have your animals with you, do you ever have any struggles with like an exaggerated response or startling from neighboring booths or anything like that? Deb, do you want to start?
So I hate AR-15 pistols. I hate them with a passion because they're loud. And because the first 4 times the guy sitting next, it's always the guy, by the way, most women don't fire them at the range that I've seen. But the first time the guy sitting in the booth next to me starts working with the AR-15 pistol, I am hands on the table in front of me and I'm just letting it pass. But then I recover, I get used to it. But it is really frustrating because the loud boom, boom, boom coming from someone else. By the way, if I'm firing a gun that makes a loud boom, 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 I love it. But I don't like it if it's right next to me, and it takes me a little while to sort of settle down. And then I start to shoot and I'm in a Zen place.
Who wants to go next?
I can. So it's very interesting here in California. If you are a California compliant, as opposed to the assault weapon registered. So if I am a California compliant, it means that I have no flash suppressor. I have a muzzle brake. If you sat next to anybody that's shooting a muzzle brake, it's like getting slapped in the face every time they drop around. I'm fine if it's just me, but if somebody, even several booths down, because that's a pretty intense movement of sound waves, it takes me just a little while to kind of settle in. But I think like Deb, after a while, it becomes a Zen thing, and I don't really notice it. But I do know that when I go to the range, the first thing I do, I don't know about everybody else, first thing I do is I check out everybody around me.
Okay.
It's like, okay, who's shooting what? What do I need to prepare it for? So if there are a couple of people out there that really like those big loud booms, and I'm okay with that, but I like to see who's brought what to the range so that I can kind of get a mindset. And once I have a sense of who's there, as long as nobody new comes along, I can pretty much settle in and just focus on what I'm doing. But it's the first couple of times that somebody drops around out of like a 308 or a 6.5 or something larger like the 338s. Yeah, it takes me a little while. I'll stop for a bit and just kind of take some breaths and get myself calm, and then go ahead and move on. But otherwise, at the range, I'm pretty confident that things aren't going to go south, mainly because I shoot at ranges that have really good RSOs and are very, very cognizant of watching people and making sure they're not like flagging folks and doing weird stuff. So I don't worry too much when I'm at a range.
And we, not to reiterate what we talked about last video, but in case somebody wasn't here, if you've got any kind of condition or disability or syndrome, you can come to the range and minimize the effect as much as you can. Obviously, you can't get rid of, you can't force them to give you a lane where there's nobody next to you, but you can ask for the last lane in the row so that if they're, it minimizes the chance that you're going to have people on both sides of you making big noises that might startle you. So that's something that you can do. And also, I had a thought and I lost it. So I'll just stop there.
I also want to say the one advantage to COVID for my ranges right now is nobody's right next to me on either side. So it's every other spot when people come to shoot. So I don't have as nearly as hard a time, one, tracking who's there, and also I don't have people on either side of me. So it lessens some of the reaction that I have to gunfire.
And Lonnie just reminded me what my thought was. It was just in general. It's not a disability type of thing, but you are your own RSO. RSO means range safety officer. If you're listening, you know what that means. Yeah, every range is supposed to have range safety officers, and they're supposed to make sure everyone's being safe. But as Lonnie said, always be aware of who's around you and what they're doing. Because then it's easy to blame the RSO if somebody has a negligent discharge, but if you could have stopped it, you would have stopped the negligent discharge, potentially somebody being injured, including yourself. So I do that all the time. I'm always looking at who's in the lane next to me, and I've actually stopped people from doing stupid things just by being mindful and knowing what they're doing and watching them with what they're doing with their gun and knowing where they might go with it. And they've thanked me for it because they don't want to do something stupid either. So don't rely on the RSOs. Listen to the RSOs, but don't rely on them. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, we'll move on to a new topic. We had a lot of questions about depression. Someone, and this one's a little bit long, but I want to give the preface because I think it's important. Somebody told the story of how for years they suffered with extreme depression, and the first gun that they ever owned was a 32 S&W long revolver that was inherited from a grandmother. So obviously it had some sentimental value, but the person had to get rid of it one night 20 years ago when she got it out wanting to kill herself. Now, thankfully, she hasn't felt like that in many, many years, and her depression is mostly under control. But she wanted to bring this issue up. And is there anything that people should do if they have someone in the house that might suffer from these things, or if they think they might suffer from these things? Do you have any tips for something special to do to keep guns difficult to access? Do you have friends? Do you know of anyone who has friends or other people that they make arrangements with to temporarily get the guns out of the house or anything like that? And I actually, as a child, had a grandfather with a very extensive and antique gun collection, and he was depressed and he had a schizophrenic episode, and one day he threatened to commit suicide, and the law enforcement came and took away his guns. So I'm wondering if any of you have anything to say about that topic.
So I've had depression for over 25 years, and at this point I'm pretty, I know my, it's more cyclical. I kind of know where I am at points, and I know, if I'm heading downwards or if I've hit bottom or if I'm heading back up. And I think that's one of the really important things to have, is this sort of insight into where you are. It's really tough when additional symptoms add on, like psychosis or and that becomes hard because you don't know how to handle these new things. But I think at least that if you can get to the point where you know where it is, then you can take steps to make sure that you are always in control of your situation. There's a great organization called the Fireweed Collective, and they do things like these advanced medical directives, for example. Like people who are in psychiatric stress are often taken to hospitals and often have things done to them against their will. Forced seclusion, taking particular drugs. And so they've been using trying to map out what they want and what they don't want in particular times of their life. And I think at the same time, you can do the same thing. If you know that there are moments at your rock bottom that you are not in a good state, I think it would be impingent upon you to be like, ask a good buddy of yours, like Nate's my buddy, like ask Nate, hey, if I'm not the suicidal depressive sort. But if I knew that there are periods when I get that way, I could say, Nate, at times I'm going to ask, call you up and just say, status orange. And Nate knows, oh, he needs to come over, pack up my stuff, take it to his safe, and just put it away until I'm back into status green or something like that. And I think we can do that in ways that, we protects our right to have mechanisms of self-defense and protects our right to be majors without putting people at risk. But it does take a particular degree of insight and does involve the medical, psychiatric, or legal institutions or the police, all four of which tend to just make the situation worse. They add stressors, they add, they make us feel even more weak and impotent and powerless and unable to control our lives. And so tend to make the spiral worse. But we don't have good systems for that. There's so much shame around both mental illness as well as right now gun ownership. So it's hard to recognize. And everyone is so deeply afraid in society because it's always, anytime a white person goes out and does something really terrible, it's, oh, sure, clearly he must be, it must be mental illness and not anything that they would attribute to other categories of people.
And Ben in chat just said that keyed gun safes lend themselves to key handoffs, or if you don't have somebody to give it to, freezing your keys in a block of ice could be a good one. And I like those suggestions.
But that's good for credit cards, and that would be for a couple hours and stuff. I mean, it might be good, but I think just having buddies that you trust who have your back is really, really important.
I agree.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, I was gonna just also add on to that, like what Karen's saying, and I don't see that, especially how we have different folks all over, the LGC, it might be good to have, to actually meet up with your buddy groups or the buddy groups that do go shooting and, rely on one another. That's what a lot of vets do. I know a lot of vets don't really trust the VA, so they talk to each other, and when they're having a hard time, instead of talking to the VA, they talk to each other. And it's the same type of thing like what Karen was talking about how someone might be like, hey, I'm having a hard time, and they'll come get their stuff and lock it up and just keep it for them until they're feeling better. Because let's face it happens to everybody. It happens, and to stigmatize people that it's happening to isn't right. So I feel it's also good, and also having that stigma doesn't help either for vets or other people that suffer from PTSD or PSS, because then they don't want to come forward, they don't want to talk about it, and then they're not willing to get the help because they're afraid to lose their rights. I know a lot of vets right now that are in that boat, and there are a lot of different types of trauma survivors that don't want to come forward because they're afraid to lose their rights. And that's not the thing. Like I've been diagnosed for a number of years now, and I held my job as an air marshal for a number of years until I wasn't able to do the job anymore.
Yeah, and I guess I want to add one quick thing, which is, I originally come from Japan, which has a suicide rate higher than the US. And we managed to do that without firearms. And so, it gets blamed, firearms get blamed for it, but, there's equally other ways of doing it quickly and without too much pain. So I'm not sure how much it's been created as this boogeyman. Sorry, Mark.
No, that's okay. I don't have experience, but I do have the benefit of research and some legal knowledge. So I just want to warn people about that buddy system. There are very strict rules against transferring guns, and you don't want to run afoul of gun transfer laws by giving your guns to a friend, a parent, perhaps, or a child. I know in California, you're allowed to transfer guns between parent and child without having to go to FFL, unless it's a handgun. And you don't have to go to an FFL for that, but then you have to send a form to Cal DOJ. But I like Ben's idea. because if you have a safe that requires a key or something, you can easily give the key to somebody else. You're not giving them the guns. There are other ways to do it, and I think they've already kind of been mentioned. If you know an FFL, you could talk to the FFL, and you can always give your guns to an FFL. That's not necessarily a transfer, and even if you were doing a transfer, you do it through an FFL. So that's a safer move. There's also an organization. I'll admit I haven't done too much research on it, but some of you have heard of Rocket Armory. They do lowers for AR-15s and whatnot, but they support a couple organizations. One called Walk the Talk America, which the whole mission of that organization is to prevent suicide by firearms and gun negligence through education and proactive activities and identify risks and awareness. So if you have questions about that, that might be a good group to go follow, support, talk to. There's also a 501c3 also is called Hold My Guns, which is also a nonprofit organization. And they want to do exactly what you guys are talking about, which is partnering with gun shops and FFLs during times of mental illness. They have a network, I'm sure, of firearms dealers, FFLs, where through their organization, you can find a way to give your guns away when you're starting to feel that, or if you're afraid that you might go down that route.
Thanks, everyone. We also had a lot of good comments in chat about, yes, the loaning your friend your locked gun locker, and of course the FFL. And I listed the organization, and Karen's also listing the organizations in chat for anybody who needs to look at those. So regarding like medication, we all know that there's some medications that, you know, that those of us that don't deal with mental health disorders or things like that, you know, so don't operate a vehicle while taking this medication. Any special topics or things to consider as a firearm owner who takes a certain medication of any kind?
Since the camera's already on me, I'll start.
Sure.
Generally, it's the same thing. You know, it's the laws on this are very specific to your jurisdiction. Some places allow you to conceal carry into a bar, you know, so look at your own local laws. But in general, if you can't drive under the influence of it, you probably shouldn't have a gun under the influence of it. Anything that affects your judgment can and will be used against you in a court of law. Even if it's not criminally, again, as we talked earlier, the criminal battle is only part of it. There's also the civil battle. So anything that you ingest that might impair you, it will be used as evidence that you shouldn't have had that gun that day or at that moment. Especially if the self-defense or the shooting isn't as clear-cut as it could be. So I would warn against, you know, using medication and then carrying, or using medication going to the range or anything like that.
Yeah, and I would add that so far the federal government and Department of Justice and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms have pretty much stated that even the legal medical use of marijuana is a disqualifier from gun ownership and gun purchase. So again, you know, there are legal drugs or illegal drugs, prescribed drugs that, like Mark said, that impair your ability to operate machinery or drive a car. You want to avoid being under the influence of those while you are in possession of a firearm and using that firearm either at the range or hunting or whatever. But you have to remember that the federal government has a very different view than, say, like here in California, where marijuana is a legally purchased. It is still a disqualifier from owning or possessing a firearm. I also want to add to Nate and to everybody else, one of the things that I know about vets is we often talk to each other long before we ever talk to the VA. For those of us who came out of the Vietnam conflict, the VA has never been very helpful. And I'm based on some of my former students who are veterans of conflict in Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia, and some of the other places. They still haven't really done a very good job of being able to work with vets around the emotional issues. And there's the whole other thing about TBI, traumatic brain injuries, and how that affects our ability to own, possess, or function firearms, or even function in the society around us.
Okay. We had a question about how gun owners cope with deaths in their family due to gunfire, how it affects their perception of firearms, and what impact it has on their views of gun control. I think this kind of relates back to what we were talking about with suicide and depression. Do you guys have any experiences or know of people that can lend a story to that?
Well, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but years ago, my brother's sister-in-law committed suicide and using a gun, and I got involved because the cleanup afterwards, after the paramedics got done, was something my brother and his family couldn't handle. So I did. It didn't really affect my particular position on gun ownership at the time. But it was really hard on my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, and her particular take on the effects of suicide, the effects of using a gun, had a much harder piece on her. I didn't really think much about it in terms of the gun. I think more about it in terms of what was the emotional situation, what was going on for her at the time, and what possibly may have helped mitigate some of those circumstances had we been aware. I think that's the hardest part about suicide in general, is those of us who survive after somebody has committed suicide have those questions in our head. How could we have not have seen this? What could we have done differently? What could we have done to make it so that this didn't happen? My brother, who is diagnosed with a mental disorder, often talks about suicide. He and I have a lot of conversations about it, and the thing that I know is that he's at least willing to mention the fact that he has these feelings, and we get to talk about it. But it's never changed my position on gun ownership.
Anyone else have anything to add to that?
So I lost my first friend to death by suicide via gunshot when I was in high school. And I have lost other friends that way as well over the years. I did not like guns for years. I've been a strong Second Amendment supporter for most of my life, but I did not personally like guns at all. And part of the reason for that was the inherent violence that I had seen kind of around it, self-violence, but also threats of violence to other people. And it took keeping a promise to my father to go shooting with him after I had hidden from him for years the fact that I was afraid of them, because he collected guns, and he was very proud of his collection of guns at the time. And so I masked it. And for his 75th birthday, I learned to shoot. And that started the journey of recognizing that guns are, while an inherent right to own the weapons by which you choose to defend yourself if necessary, guns themselves were not interesting to me until I discovered the Zen of shooting. But in the back of my head, there was this experience of losing people I cared about to suicide using a gun. But I've also lost friends to suicide not using a gun. And that's a logic piece. And I think Karen alluded to it earlier when my last name is Yamanaka. I'm clearly not of Japanese descent, but I have some familiarity with the Japanese culture, and she's absolutely right. The Japanese have one of the highest suicides per capita rates in the world, and they do not have a lot of guns in their households. Suicide is a thing that people will find a way to do if they're absolutely determined to do it, and the mechanism by which they do it is almost irrelevant.
Okay, so onto a new topic, kind of a closing. Is there a level or severity of disability that should automatically revoke or require special consideration for the disabled individual that wants to own or possess or carry a firearm? Anyone?
Are you asking that as an opinion, or as a legal opinion, or a personal opinion?
Well,
Personal.
yeah, I guess a personal opinion. The person asked it. They didn't really, they didn't have a whole lot of context with it. I guess it's opinion. We'll ask
Yeah.
Mark. We'll ask Mark for his
Yeah.
legal opinion.
Yeah, I think, it's like, in my research, I deal with a lot of people who have, schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And sometimes they can be quite severe. But I think for me, the most important thing is that it's the newly disabled person, and it really doesn't matter what the disability is. It's a newly disabled person who's just really they don't know what the hell is going on. They don't know why they're reacting to things a particular way. They don't know what the reality is, like their new reality is. They don't know like if it's gonna be this way all the time or if it's gonna wax and wane. That's the quote unquote dangerous moment. And the problem is that things that happen in that sort of introductory period can mark you for life. And so it's like, how do we like protect people against? And it's so hard, right? Because if you know that getting 5150 will mean that they're going to take away, your mechanisms of self-defense or your future mechanism, maybe you won't go seek help, and maybe that'll make it just even worse. And so just the whole system of fear and anxiety, and we must protect the herd against, crazy people at all costs, has created a system where people just block everything up inside themselves. And I think that's true in a lot of, people, is that they're just they're afraid to like talk about things. They're afraid of revealing stuff to their doctor. They're afraid of revealing stuff to, their, employee care system, because they're afraid that it will mean that they'll lose everything. I mean, we're just going to get a new red flag law in California, which I think your employer can now red flag you. Your coworkers can red flag. A whole bunch of people can now red flag you, and it's just absolutely terrifying. It's like so revealing that you have depression or PTSD and you have firearms. Suddenly everyone's scared of you, and they're going to red flag you. It's just like. So it makes everyone like bottle things up. I think it's this culture of fear is the real problem.
So I think that if you are not able to function mentally as an adult, and that really is subjective in a lot of ways. We don't hand 3-year-olds guns. And there are individuals who will never mentally mature past a certain age. And if that age isn't able to manage responsibly the gun at, in a normal circumstance. So I'm not doing a great job of explaining this, and I apologize, but I am aware of an individual right now who has been doing an amazing job raising a young woman who is 18 years old, and she will never, ever make it past the mental maturity of a 5-year-old, this child. That is an example of a person that I think should not be permitted to own guns, because they cannot function in our society as an adult. Now, there's a whole lot of subjectiveness around where does that line really fall. but I've got a hard line on it. If the mental capacity of the individual isn't sufficient that they can understand the basics of functioning as an adult, I say no.
I'll chime in as well because I know who brought that question in. Um, the question is phrased as a should versus like what is the rule, and we kind of went over it earlier. Like the law sets it as, you know, has somebody said or adjudicated the fact that you are a danger either to yourself or to others. So you know, that baseline is there. But now we do have the complication of these red flag laws. So it's not so much a court or a panel of psychiatrists or psychologists, you know, evaluating you. Now it's your employer, and now it's your, you know, siblings or your family member or your significant other is now able to chime in and tell the authorities, hey, I don't think this person should have a gun. And I think Karen's absolutely right that that's going to scare a lot of people into not sharing. I mean, if you can't even talk to your family members about what's going on in your life because you're afraid that they might call the authorities and say this person should have a gun, that's going to prevent you from getting help. That's going to prevent you from getting the therapy you need. You know, even if it's just a temporary issue. So the should. I think the should is still like, are you an actual danger to yourself or others? You know, I think we can agree on some baselines. Like if somebody has a nerve disorder where their hand, it twitches uncontrollably, or they have some sort of Tourette's thing that makes their hand close unexpectedly, maybe that person shouldn't have a gun because, you know, you can't, you might squeeze the trigger when you don't intend to. So it's a physical disability. There's also, you know, exactly what Deb just talked about. If the person doesn't have the capacity to control themselves or to think, you know, as an adult might be able to think, maybe, you know, they don't have the maturity level or the cognitive ability to process those kinds of things, then that's one of those things I would think is a should not have access to a firearm. Just like we don't want our kids to, you know, have access to our firearms without our supervision. So there is a bright line, you know, if there is an adjudication from a professional or a court that has evaluated evidence and said you are a danger, or you know, you've admitted that you're insane by pleading insanity as a defense, something like that. Those make sense. Those should stay. I don't think we should lessen the burden. So I do agree, though, that the red flag laws are a problem because you're getting rid of that evaluation and the evidence. You know, we already have the procedure for a 5150 hold. If somebody is an actual danger to themselves and they haven't yet been adjudicated that way, you know, you call the police and they evaluate the scene, and if you are, they'll detain you. And now you've been detained involuntarily. Now you've got now you have to check that box on the 4473, and so there are ways to get around that. You know, if you were wrongfully detained, there's a court system for that. There isn't so much a court system for the red flag laws, you know, as they stand right now until later. It's like take the rights and then we'll figure out if we're right. And we don't. I think that's a dangerous place to go.
So I just want to, my concern about red flag laws essentially is that, you know, I was a high school teacher as part of my career, and many of my colleagues are very liberal, but also very, very, very anti-gun. And under the current conditions of red flag laws, any one of them could, if they decided to be pissed at me, could very easily, you know, call the local agency and use their ability to confiscate my weapons. So it also makes it really hard for me to be very open as a gun owner, as a liberal, because my liberal friends, some of which are, like I said, incredibly Second Amendment and anti-gun, and aren't even willing to have a discussion about whether or not they are making an informed opinion, it makes it really difficult for me to be more out to them and to convince them that it makes perfect sense for liberals to actually own guns too. So it is a real concern that I work with all the time. Fortunately, most of my neighbors are pretty good. Most of them have siblings and or offspring who are members of the military, and so they're not quite as hardcore in the anti-gun world. But it is a concern that I have.
So David Mayor Summer, maybe he's on this. He's listening in on this. Virginia introduced red flag laws in the legislation back in January. And my understanding, it was one of the things that we fought for, and I believe it was included, was the if you have the red flag law called on you and it is false, somebody who's doing it out of retribution, your neighbors are doing it because they've just decided, because they're strong anti-gun liberals, for example, there's a recourse that you have available to you in response. So I don't know if he is still on and if he can be unmuted and if he even knows, but that's very jurisdictional. And so every state that is passing red flag laws is addressing the wrongful accusation issue differently. And that was a big deal for us when we were, red flag laws have a valid role to play in some circumstances, but to use them punitively because you're mad at your ex or mad at your neighbor is, or just don't think guns should be in your neighborhood is not okay. So David has just hit the video. David, do you remember if that was the case in the Virginia side, if we got that through?
Here's what I remember. And I don't have the legislation in front of me, but, and thank you for bringing this up, because for those of you who are going to be legislatively active, this is important. I do not personally have an issue with a well-done red flag law. I don't believe one can exist, but if you can figure out how to do it, that's great. The first problem with red flag laws is in Virginia is, yes, in theory, the DA can go after the person in question who filed it. And I think it's a class 6 felony. It's like a misdemeanor, year in jail, which is an absolute joke because there isn't going to be a DA in Northern Virginia where these laws are most likely going to be used, or in Richmond or in Tidewater, that's actually going to throw someone in jail for it. There's also, in theory, in theory, you could sue the person under a theory of general liability, not a lawyer, but you probably, but it would be under, it's a false statement. And if the police knew that this other, if the police knew, you might have recourse under federal law dealing with abuse of power, or a state law dealing with abuse of power by police. My advice, if you're lobbying your state legislature, is make sure that encoded in the law is the private right of action, where you can recover 3 times, at least 3 times the cost of defending yourself, because that'll make it pretty tasty for lawyers to take your case if you have a reasonable chance.
Yeah, Mark, the actual lawyer in this group is thumbsing you up. So anyway.
And the other piece is and this one I think is also even more important, because a lot of the people who are affected by this, they're not going to have their own financial resources, and this is a class issue.
Right.
It should be, at a minimum, you should be able to avail yourself of a public defender. Not that they're going to be horribly overworked, but at least you're going to have a lawyer, because a lot of these cases, people don't even challenge it when they should be able to. I mean, there are other cases where legitimately they need to not own sharp, pointy objects.
And David, that is really good information and really good advice for advocacy. I mean, any kind of law that takes first and figures out the facts second should have time limits for how long the government has to come up with a determination, and the evidence that they have to consider should be well defined. And of course, the repercussions for failing to do so should also be well defined. I don't think any government's going to agree to triple damages, for a false arrest, for instance. But if for failure to, adjudicate the claim, within 5 days or within 15 days, whatever is reasonable, sounds reasonable to me. I mean, the government has a job to do, and that's keeping people safe as well. So it is a balance.
I'm speaking more of triple damages if someone makes a false statement.
So civil liability for the person making the red flag claim.
You got it. Even if they're a government employee, if it's clearly false, knew or should have known, or they were clearly making it up, that to me is obvious. The other piece in a lot of these laws is it's like the hearings within 2 weeks. For somebody like me, I'm professional. I have the resources, I have the contacts, is I can take the next day off of work, call a bunch of lawyers, and get myself in front of a forensic psychologist. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people are going to be afraid of having that conversation. And that's what scares me.
Well, thanks a lot for the information. We're going to steer it back towards disabilities. The advocacy part's really fun, and we could talk about it all day long. And maybe we'll do that another time. But for now, let's focus back on the disability. So what's the next question, Danielle?
Actually, that was the last question. So there is a little bit of discussion going on about maybe we can have a red flag panel in the future. I do want to thank all of you, Deb, Lonnie, Karen, Mark, Nate, for sharing your stories with us, because people who don't know anyone who deals with an issue like your guys's is learning a lot from what you guys have to say. This may be the start of a diversity type panel. Ed mentioned wanting to do one, once a month, mixed in with the other normal streaming content, because we had such a great reaction to the ladies panel at National, and both of these disability panels have been very well received. So if anybody is a part of a diverse group or has an issue that they would like to see addressed, and has people who can help them with it, you can email Ed, contact him on social media, or you can contact me as well in all of the normal forms. Plus my club email is lgcevents@theliberalgunclub.com, and I'm willing to help anybody get things going as needed. So thank you everyone for attending and presenting for us, and I'll hand it back to our fearless leader, Ed.
I don't know how fearless I am, but yeah.
Ruggedly handsome is the correct adjective.
No, big pain in the ass is what he's really known.
I was going to say something about how it was great of everybody to share their stories with me. I usually only get to go F yourself from Lonnie, so that was well timed. Thank you all panelists for sharing with us. That was excellent.
And thanks specifically to Honor, the most glamorous dog in the world, sitting on the couch there.
Indeed. Thanks, Donna.
Yeah, he said your name. He heard that.
You heard that, yeah.
But this was great, and yeah, the intention is to replace one of the 4 meetings per month that we have, or that we've been doing now going forward, with something that's not Scott unable to put his gun back together. So we're actively seeking somebody for maybe this time next month for a panel. There are some obvious ones. I don't want to volunteer anybody just yet, but I'm likely going to end up doing that because I know some people that'd be great at it. Brian Robinson. And next week we're back to the bench doctors. So he's going to be He's got a shotgun project he wants us all to watch him fail at, and it promises to be very entertaining. So without further ado, I'm going to kill the audio stream. I'm sorry, the video stream, and a big round of applause for everybody. And if you're not on the Discord server, somebody's going to drop a link into the Discord server invite right now. Come join us for the pub. Come join us for the laughs. Come join us to hear Lonnie tell me that I'm an asshole. Good night, everybody.
I'm not going to do that right away.
Not right away.
I'll
We love
start.
you, Ed.
I'll start. I'll get the crowd warmed up, and then Lonnie will jump in.
All
Thank
right.
you, Mark. It's about time somebody else did that.
All right. I'm killing the live stream.